For months, nothing happened. The sky stayed quiet, cold, predictable, high above Earth, beyond the noise of cities and the pull of gravity. A small object moved through space. Slow, silent, easy to miss. Astronomers gave it a name, logged its path, drew thin lines across dark screens. Another object, another pass, another routine moment in an endless universe. It was drifting along the ecliptic, the flat plane where planets move, heading toward perihelion, the point where objects come closest to the sun, and everything about it felt familiar. At first, every night, telescopes followed its journey. Tiny adjustments, small corrections, the kind of work that never makes headlines. The object didn't glow, didn't flare, didn't scream for attention. It just moved. Like countless others before it, most people never knew it existed, and that was fine. Because space is full of travelers like this. Old fragments, frozen leftovers, silent witnesses to a solar system long past. Until the data arrived. Not images, not photos, numbers. Rows and rows of light measurements. Brightness over time, what scientists call a light curve. Usually, light curves are calm things, smooth rises, gentle falls. They tell simple stories. This object was expected to brighten as it neared the sun, reflect more light, then slowly fade away. That's how physics works. That's how it has always worked. But when the first light curve was plotted, something felt off. Not broken, not chaotic, just wrong. The line refused to smooth out. It jumped when it should have dipped, flattened when it should have risen. At first, no one panicked. Data errors happen all the time. A sensor glitch, a timing issue, a calibration mistake. So they ran it again. Same result. They adjusted the model. Same result. They checked the instruments. Clean, stable, verified. The light curve still wouldn't behave. It wasn't random. That was the unsettling part. Random data looks messy, noisy, confused. This wasn't confused. It was structured. Subtle but deliberate. Like something tapping its finger, not loudly, just enough to be noticed if you were paying attention. The object brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again. Not smoothly, in steps, as if responding to something unseen, as if the sky itself had paused and then changed its mind. Astronomers stared at the screen longer than they meant to. Some leaned back in their chairs, others leaned forward. No one said much. Because when data breaks expectations, silence comes first. You don't jump to conclusions in science. You doubt yourself. You ask the most uncomfortable question of all. Did we do something wrong? More observations followed. Different telescopes, different locations, different nights. The object didn't care. The pattern stayed. It wasn't dramatic enough to scare anyone yet, but it was persistent. A low hum in the background of the universe, and slowly, the feeling changed. This wasn't just a strange object. It was a strange moment, because space is supposed to be honest. Cold, yes. Violent, sometimes, but honest. When something breaks the rules, it usually does it loudly, with explosions, flares, destruction. This didn't. This whispered. As the object continued its approach toward perihelion, the sun's glare should have washed everything out. Instead, the signal sharpened. The light curve gained detail, more steps, More pauses, almost like hesitation, almost like choice. No one said that out loud, not yet. But the thought hung in the room, uninvited, uncomfortable. Late at night, when offices emptied and monitors dimmed, a few scientists stayed behind. They replayed the data, frame by frame, second by second, trying to convince themselves it was normal, trying to force the universe back into the box it's always lived in. But the numbers wouldn't go back. They refused to settle. And that's when the waiting began. Not the waiting of time, but the waiting of breath. The kind where you feel something coming, but you don't know what. The sky looked the same as it always had. Stars burned quietly. Planets followed their paths. Nothing else seemed wrong. But somewhere between Earth and the sun, a small object was writing a story in light. And we were only reading the first line. The question wasn't what it was yet. The question was simpler and heavier. Why did it stop behaving like everything else? As the object drifted closer, as perihelion approached, as the sun's influence grew stronger, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just another passing body. It was an anomaly, a crack in expectation, a pause in certainty. And for the first time in months, the sky didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was waiting for us to notice, waiting for the next signal, waiting for something to change. And somewhere inside that quiet, a question formed that no one was ready to answer yet. What did the sky just reveal, and why now? At first it looked harmless, just a body of rock and ice, drifting through space like it had done for millions of years, cold, silent, inert. The early observation reports were calm, almost boring. Size within expectation, trajectory clean, no visible tail, no sudden outbursts. To the universe, it was just another traveler passing through the sun's domain. And to most scientists, that was comforting, because the cosmos is easier to understand when it behaves the way it always has. Light hits the surface reflects it, and shadows fall exactly where they should. Simple cause, simple effect. That's how it's supposed to work. But then, someone noticed something small. Not dramatic. Not headline-worthy. Just a number that felt a little too high. Reflectivity. The object was bouncing back more sunlight than expected. At first, it didn't raise alarms. Some materials do that. Ice crystals, smooth surfaces, fresh fractures. So they adjusted the assumptions, changed the surface model, tweaked the composition. Rock mixed with ice mixed with dust. Still, the numbers stayed high, too high, and stranger still, the brightness wasn't uniform. Certain regions flared brighter than others, not where sunlight struck directly, but where shadows should have been. That's when certainty began to crack, because shadows are honest. They exist where light can't reach. They don't glow, they don't shine, they don't suddenly reflect more light than their surroundings. Yet here they were, on the data. Bright patches, appearing in places that should have been dark. Not once, not twice, but consistently. Like the object wasn't just reflecting light, like it was redistributing it. Scientists stared at the graphs longer than usual, zoomed in, zoomed out, checked angles, checked rotation. The object wasn't tumbling wildly. Its spin was slow, controlled, almost calm, which made the reflectivity even harder to to explain. Because chaos could have saved them. Chaos always saves uncomfortable questions, but this wasn't chaos. This was order. The bright regions appeared, held steady, then faded, almost like shutters opening and closing, almost like panels turning toward the sun, then away. No one said artificial, not out loud, but the word hovered. Unspoken words are the heaviest kind. Emails started to sound different, less confident, more cautious. Phrases like unusual behavior, unexpected reflectance, further analysis required, careful language. Because science doesn't panic, it hesitates. Still, doubt crept in. If this were just ice, why didn't it behave like ice? If it were rock, why did it reflect like polished metal? If it were dust, why did it act with such precision? Each explanation solved one problem and created two more. The object was cold, yet reflective, dark, yet bright, simple, yet complex. And the closer it moved toward perihelion, the worse it got. Sunlight intensified, angles sharpened, and the spikes became clearer, not smoother, clearer, as if the object wanted to be seen, but only from certain perspectives, as if it cared about how it was observed. That thought made people uncomfortable, because nature doesn't care. Nature doesn't adjust for observers. It doesn't hide details behind geometry. It just is. Late-night discussions turned quiet. Someone would point at the data, then stop mid-sentence. Someone else would shake their head, not in disbelief, but in confusion. Confusion is scarier than fear. Fear has direction. Confusion just sits there, staring back at you. One team suggested extreme surface layering. Another proposed exotic minerals formed outside the solar system. Both ideas stretched known physics, but stayed technically possible. Barely. Still, something didn't sit right. The reflectivity spikes weren't random. They followed a pattern, appearing at similar solar angles, repeating across observations, like a behavior, not a property. And that's when the question quietly changed. Not, what is it made of, but what is it doing? Because materials don't make choices. They don't favor certain angles. They don't create contrast where physics says there should be none. Unless something is shaping the interaction, unless the surface isn't passive, unless the object isn't just reacting to the sun, but responding to it. That thought stayed buried, but it changed everything. Suddenly, every new data point felt heavier. Every reflection felt intentional, and every shadow felt wrong. The object continued drifting forward, silent, unchanged, unconcerned, while back on Earth, certainty was unraveling. Not in explosions, not in panic, but in quiet realization. The most dangerous kind, because once rules start bending, you don't know where they stop. And this discovery, this simple, cold traveler, was no longer fitting into the universe we understood. It was still far away, still small, still silent. But it had done something powerful. It had made scientists question the basics. Light, shadow, reflection, things we thought we understood. And as the object moved closer to the sun, closer to perihelion, closer to full exposure, one unsettling thought lingered. If this is only the surface behavior, what happens when it gets closer? What happens when the sun pushes harder? And what else might this discovery be hiding, just out of view? At first, it was easy to dismiss. just tiny flickers in the data, barely above the background noise. The kind of thing astronomers see all the time. Cosmic dust, sensor drift, a star blinking in the wrong place. Nothing worth slowing down for. But then it happened again and again. A slight rise in brightness, then a fall, then silence. Not random, not chaotic. Measured. Somewhere deep in the data logs, a pattern began to form, so faint you could miss it if you weren't looking for trouble. And at first, no one was, because the object was still silent, still cold, still drifting through the dark like it didn't care who was watching. But the light curve had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. A gentle pulse, repeating at regular intervals. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Too clean to be an accident. One observatory noticed it first. A quiet note added at the bottom of a report. Minor periodic variation detected. Nothing more. But when another observatory, thousands of miles away, checked their own data, they saw the same thing. Same timing. Same spacing. Same beat. That's when curiosity sharpened. Because noise doesn't coordinate across continents. Random errors don't agree with each other. Yet here they were, separated by distance, weather, hardware, seeing the same pulse. At the same time, astronomers synchronized clocks, checked timestamps down to the second, and the rhythm held. A slow, steady heartbeat emerging from the dark. The object brightened, dimmed, then waited. Not flickering wildly like a star, not erupting like a comet, just pulsing, as if something inside it was turning on, then off, again and again. The silence between pulses was just as unsettling, because it wasn't empty. It felt intentional, like a pause, waiting to see if someone noticed. Teams began layering data, optical light, infrared, different wavelengths. The pulse appeared across more than one range, not strong, but consistent, and consistency changes everything. Someone joked that it looked like a metronome. No one laughed, because jokes are how we test dangerous ideas, and this one landed too close to the truth. The rhythm didn't drift, didn't speed up, didn't slow down. Space objects spin. They tumble, they wobble, their signals smear and stretch. This didn't. It kept time perfectly. The closer the object moved towards perihelion, the clearer the pulse became. Not louder, clearer, as if the sun's influence wasn't disrupting it, but revealing it. That realization sent a chill through the room, because the sun is violent. Radiation, heat, pressure. Most things break under that kind of stress. This didn't break. It maintained rhythm. Some suggested rotation. Maybe the object had reflective regions that came into view as it spun. A simple answer. Comforting. But rotation creates curves, smooth waves, gradual changes. This pulse was sharp. On, off. No in between. Others suggested venting gases, small bursts of material releasing energy. But gas clouds don't follow clocks. They sputter. They fade. They misbehave. This didn't. The pulse arrived, paused, returned, like it was counting. And then something even stranger happened. The timing matched Earth-based detection windows. When observatories could see it, the pulse appeared. When they couldn't, it vanished into darkness. Not because it stopped, but because no one was watching. That detail unsettled people in ways they didn't want to admit, because it raised a quiet, uncomfortable thought. Was the pulse always there, or did it only appear when observed? No one said that out loud, but the idea sat there, heavy, unblinking. Late at night, scientists replayed the data alone. Screens glowing in dark rooms, listening to the silence between pulses like it meant something. Tap, pause, tap, a heartbeat without a body. Some tried to calculate meaning. Prime numbers, ratios, sequences. Others refused to go that far. Because once you start searching for intention, you risk finding it. And finding it changes you. Emails became careful. Words like signal replaced variation. Words like periodic replaced noise. Language tightened. So did nerves. Publicly, nothing had changed. No announcements, no warnings. Just another object drifting toward the sun. But privately, the mood shifted. This wasn't just light anymore. It was timing. And timing implies control. Control implies process. And process implies something behind it. Something keeping the beat. The object never accelerated, never altered course, never acknowledged the attention. It just pulsed patiently, steadily, like it had all the time in the universe. And maybe it did, because whatever was happening out there didn't feel rushed. It felt deliberate, measured, as if this wasn't the first time it had done this, as if it had pulsed before, in other systems, under other suns, as if we were late to the observation. The idea was terrifying in its simplicity. Not invasion, not attack, just presence. Doing what it always does, whether we understand it or not. As the object slipped deeper into the sun's influence, the pulse continued, unbroken, unconcerned. And that's when the question stopped being scientific. It became personal. Because when something keeps perfect time in the dark, you have to ask yourself, is it signaling? Is it functioning? Or is it simply alive in a way we don't recognize? And if someone or something is keeping the beat, who taught it the rhythm? And more importantly, who was it meant for? The first thermal readings didn't cause alarm. They never do. Heat data usually behaves politely. It follows rules, simple rules. Closer to the sun means warmer. Farther away means colder. That logic has guided astronomy for centuries. So when the object moved closer to perihelion, everyone expected the same thing. A steady rise in temperature. A predictable curve. Nothing surprising. Nothing worth losing sleep over. But the numbers didn't rise. They dipped, just slightly at first. Enough to make someone blink, then check again. The object was closer to the sun than it had been days earlier. Yet it was cooler. Not dramatically, not impossibly, just wrong. But first, it was blamed on shadows. Maybe its rotation exposed darker regions. Maybe its shape blocked heat unevenly. Those explanations brought comfort. Comfort doesn't last long in science. The next set of readings arrived, and the temperature dropped again. Closer, cooler. That's when people stopped talking mid-sentence, because this wasn't just unexpected, it was backwards. Thermal models were pulled up, adjusted, rewritten. Assumptions changed. Surface roughness, material density, subsurface ice. Every known trick was tried. Nothing fit. The object should have been heating up. Instead, it was shedding heat, almost like it was resisting the sun. Then, just when the models were stretched to their limits, the temperature rose, but not where it should have. The object slipped into partial shadow. Sunlight weakened, distance increased, and the thermal readings climbed. Warmer in the dark. That's when the room went quiet. Because shadows don't add heat. They take it away, unless something else is at work. Unless heat isn't just arriving, but being managed. The data didn't show spikes or flares. No explosions, no vents, no violent release. Just smooth changes. Controlled changes. Cooling when exposed, warming when hidden. As if the object knew when to protect itself. As if it understood the difference between danger and safety. Someone whispered the word insulation. Another suggested layered materials. Others nodded, slowly unsure. Because insulation doesn't reverse heat flow. It only slows it. This wasn't slow. It was precise. Timed. Almost synchronized with the light pulses. Brightness dipped. Temperature dipped. Brightness rose. Temperature followed. Two separate systems behaving together. That correlation was impossible to ignore, because nature rarely coordinates like that. Not without chaos. Not without randomness. But this wasn't messy. It was elegant. And elegance is unsettling, especially when it appears where it shouldn't. As the object continued towards perihelion, the sun pressed harder. Radiation intensified. Solar wind surged. This is where fragile bodies crack, comets erupt, asteroids fracture. This object didn't. Its temperature flattened, stabilized, like a hand pressing gently against a door, keeping it from opening too far. That's when the question changed. Not, why is it cold? But, how does it know when to be cold? Because regulation implies feedback. Feedback implies sensing. And sensing implies awareness, at least at some level. No one wanted to say that, so they didn't. They talked about thermal inertia, delayed response, exotic conductivity, words built to keep the universe familiar. But late at night, when screens glowed and offices emptied, those words felt thin, because the object wasn't just reacting, it was anticipating. Cooling before peak exposure. Warming before complete darkness, as if it was reading its environment and responding accordingly. A machine would do that. So would something alive. Neither answer felt safe. One scientist pointed out something chilling. The thermal pattern repeated. Not perfectly, but closely enough. Each cycle near perihelion followed the same curve, like a routine. Like a system running its program. No drift, no degradation, just repetition. That's when the phrase self-regulating appeared in private notes, not in official papers. Not yet. Because once you write that, you can't erase it. Self-regulation means autonomy. Autonomy means independence. And independence out there raises questions no one is ready to face. The object didn't change course, didn't respond faster, didn't escalate. It simply maintained balance against the most violent force in the solar system, the sun. That alone should have been impossible. But impossibility doesn't stop reality. It only delays acceptance. As the object slipped through perihelion, closer than it had ever been, the temperatures remained calm, controlled, as if the sun wasn't a threat, just another variable. And that's when fear quietly crept in. Not panic, not terror, fear of implication. Because if something out there can manage heat, manage light, manage timing. Then what else can it manage? And why does it need to? The data ended where it always does, at the edge of what instruments can resolve. Beyond that, silence. No final spike, no dramatic failure, just a steady thermal curve, fading into distance. As if the object had finished a task, as if it had passed a test. And back on Earth, with the sun still burning, and the sky looking the same as ever, a disturbing thought took root. If this object can regulate itself, protect itself, adapt quietly, then maybe it wasn't built to survive us noticing. Maybe it was built to survive stars. And if that's true, then this wasn't just heat that shouldn't exist. It was control. And control means purpose. Which leads to the question no one wanted to ask yet. If something out there is regulating itself, what is it waiting for? At some point, the mystery stopped belonging to one lab. It spilled outward. Quietly at first, a second team reviewed the data, then a third, then a fourth. Different countries, different instruments, different methods, same results, the same pulse, the same thermal shifts, the same impossible patterns. That's when the anomaly widened, because one strange dataset can be ignored, two can be debated. But when everyone starts seeing the same thing, from different angles, at different times, silence becomes harder to maintain. Emails crossed borders, short messages, carefully worded. Are you seeing this too? Can you confirm? Please tell us we're wrong. They weren't wrong. Each confirmation tightened the knot. The object behaved the same way no matter who looked at it. Brightness rose and fell in rhythm. Heat moved against logic. Reflectivity spiked where shadows lived. Every team tried to break the pattern, to prove it was coincidence, to find the flaw. They changed filters, adjusted algorithms, removed entire chunks of data. The pattern survived. It didn't care who doubted it. It didn't care who wanted it gone. It just stayed, like a stain that won't wash out, no matter how clean the surface looks. At conferences, the mood shifted. Not openly, not on stage, but in the hallways. In the pauses between talks, people spoke slower, listened more, avoided eye contact when certain charts appeared, because now it wasn't about discovery, it was about responsibility. Once an anomaly is shared, it becomes real. And this one came with weight. No one wanted to be the first to say the wrong thing, so they said nothing. Official summaries stayed neutral. Unusual behavior observed. Further study required. No definitive conclusions. Safe language. Language designed to hold the door shut, even as pressure builds behind it. But privately, the conversations changed tone. This wasn't about instruments anymore. It was about agreement, the unsettling kind. Because when independent teams converge on the same result, science usually celebrates. This time, it hesitated, because agreement removes escape routes. You can't blame hardware. You can't blame bias. You can't pretend it's local noise. The anomaly wasn't local. It was systemic, global, shared, and that meant it belonged to the universe, not the observers. Someone finally said it in a closed meeting. Not loudly, not confidently, just enough to be heard. This isn't going away. No one argued. Instead, they stared at the projected data, lines rising and falling together, light and heat moving in quiet coordination, a pattern that refused to behave like nature, yet also refused to announce itself as anything else. That ambiguity was the cruelest part, because the anomaly didn't shout. It whispered, and whispers force you to lean in, even when you don't want to hear what's being said. Teams began cross-checking timing. The pulses aligned down to the second. Teams compared thermal curves, nearly identical. Small variations, but the same structure. Like copies made from the same original. That's when the question stopped being technical. It became social. Why, if everyone sees it, does no one want to name it? Because naming something gives it shape. And shape demands response. If you call it a natural oddity, you downplay it. If you call it a malfunction, you dismiss it. If you call it artificial, you invite consequences no one can control. So the anomaly lived in a grey zone. Not denied. Not accepted. Just suspended. Press releases stayed vague. No urgency. No excitement. Just ongoing observation. Because the public doesn't need to know until someone knows what to say. But knowledge lagged behind reality. The data kept arriving, and each new packet tightened the story. The object wasn't changing. It wasn't escalating. It wasn't correcting itself under scrutiny. It behaved the same, no matter how many eyes watched it. That consistency was terrifying. Because fear usually fades with familiarity. This didn't. It deepened. Some scientists stopped volunteering comments. Others asked to be removed from public-facing roles, not because they were scared of the object, but because they were scared of interpretation. Because once the idea enters public consciousness, it never leaves, and everyone knew it. Late-night debates grew sharper. Some argued that the anomaly was still within extreme natural limits, rare but possible. Others pushed back. How many extremes stack before coincidence breaks? No one had an answer. Because probability doesn't prepare you for patterns. Patterns feel intentional, even when they aren't. And this one felt deliberate in a way statistics couldn't soothe. The object continued its journey, unaware, unchanged, as if it had already done this before. As if it knew how long to behave and when to stop. That thought stayed unspoken, but it changed how people looked at the sky. Because now, it wasn't just about one object. It was about trust. Trust in models. Trust in assumptions. Trust that the universe still plays by rules we understand. The anomaly was widening, not in size, but in implication. Every confirmation made denial harder. Every agreement made silence louder. And somewhere in that growing gap, between what was seen and what was said, a truth hovered. Heavy, uncomfortable. Everyone was looking at the same thing. Everyone knew it didn't fit, and yet, no one wanted to be the first to give it a name. Because names turn questions into statements, and statements demand answers, and deep down, everyone sensed the same thing. This anomaly wasn't asking to be explained. It was waiting to be acknowledged. And until someone crossed that line, until someone spoke the word no one wanted to say, the pattern would remain what it was, visible, confirmed, uncontained, and growing. There was a moment, quiet and brief, when the data stopped feeling strange and started feeling deliberate. It happened during a routine angle adjustment. The object had rotated just enough for sunlight to strike a new section of its surface. Nothing unusual was expected. Just another dull reflection, another soft curve on the light graph. But instead, the brightness spiked. Not gently, not gradually. It flashed, a sudden surge of light, sharp, clean, undeniable. Brighter than ice, brighter than rock, brighter than anything the models said was possible. For a split second, the object shone like a mirror. Then it stopped. The room froze. Because this wasn't scatter, it wasn't diffuse glow, it was directed, focused. As if the light had been caught, shaped, and released on purpose. At first, disbelief took over. Angles were rechecked, exposure settings reviewed, atmospheric interference ruled out. Nothing explained it. The sun hadn't flared, the telescope hadn't glitched. The flash came from the object itself, and stranger still, it only appeared at specific angles. Not when the sun hit it head-on, not when it passed through shadow. Only at narrow, precise positions, like a key turning in a lock. That's when the phrase specular reflection entered the conversation. Mirror-like behavior, rare but known. Some surfaces can reflect light cleanly if they're smooth enough. Ice can do it, metal can do it. But this wasn't smooth randomness. This was precision. The flash didn't smear or scatter. It snapped on, then off, as if a surface panel had aligned perfectly, then moved away. Again, no one said design, but the silence grew heavier. Because natural surfaces don't care about angles that much. They reflect broadly, messily. They don't wait for the perfect moment. The object did. Over the next several rotations, it happened again. Same angle, same intensity, same duration. Like a lighthouse that only shines when you stand in exactly the right place. That pattern changed everything. Because reflectivity stopped being a property and started looking like behavior. Teams layered the reflectivity data over the pulse timing. They matched, not perfectly, but close enough to raise eyebrows. The flashes appeared near pulse peaks, as if light and rhythm were linked, as if the object wasn't just reflecting, but coordinating. That idea felt dangerous, because coordination implies control. Control implies structure, and structure implies intent, whether we like it or not. Some argued it was crystalline ice, exotic, rare, but still natural. Others suggested metallic inclusions, nickel-rich regions exposed by erosion. Possible, but those explanations collapsed under repetition, because erosion is uneven. Crystals fracture. Natural surfaces degrade. This didn't. The flashes stayed sharp, consistent, unworn, like something built to maintain shape, even after long travel through space. Someone pulled up comparative data. Comets, asteroids, interstellar debris. Nothing behaved like this. Nothing waited for alignment. Nothing reflected so cleanly, so selectively, so quietly. And then came the most unsettling realization of all. The flash wasn't strongest when the sun was brightest. It was strongest when the geometry was just right, which meant the object wasn't maximizing light. It was controlling it, like angling a mirror, not to gather energy, but to send it somewhere. That thought landed hard, because sending light implies direction, and direction implies a target. No one wanted to speculate where, so they didn't. Instead, they focused on physics, surface roughness calculations, microstructure simulations. None of them produced results this sharp without artificial precision. Even the most extreme natural models fell short. The surface would need to be smooth at a scale nature rarely achieves, and maintain that smoothness across time, radiation and temperature swings, against the sun, against vacuum, against millions of years. It didn't make sense, and yet the data didn't lie. Each flash appeared clean, bright, controlled, then vanished without residue. No debris, no heating spike, just light, used, and gone. Like a signal that didn't want to linger. That restraint was chilling, because if this were random, it would be sloppy. If it were violent, it would be obvious. This was neither. It was quiet confidence, as if the object didn't need to shout. It only needed to be precise. Someone finally said it, half joking, half serious. It's acting like an instrument. The room went still, because instruments are built. They are designed to interact with the world in specific ways. They don't just exist, they function. No one laughed, because the word fit too well. The reflectivity wasn't everywhere. It was localized, specific regions, specific responses, specific outcomes. And suddenly, the object didn't feel like a rock tumbling through space. It felt like something facing outward, deciding when and how to reveal itself. The public still knew nothing. The sky still looked the same. Stars burned. The sun rose and set. But among those watching closely, the question had shifted again. Not, is this unusual? Not even, is this artificial? But something far more unsettling. If this light is shaped, if it's directed, if it's controlled, then why? Why reflect at all? Why not absorb? Why not hide completely, unless hiding isn't the goal? Unless being seen, briefly, selectively, is part of the process. That idea refused to leave. As the object moved on, as angles changed, as the mirror-like flashes grew rarer, the impression remained. This wasn't accidental beauty. It was purposeful restraint, a surface that knew when to shine and when to go dark. And once you see that, you can't unsee it, because nature reflects without thinking. But this felt like choice. And if choice exists out there, wrapped in silence, hidden in light, then the question becomes unavoidable. Is this just a rare trick of physics? Or are we looking at design so old, so distant, that it no longer needs to announce itself? Because whatever this object is, it doesn't just passively reflect the universe, it interacts with it. And that means the universe might be interacting back. The idea didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in. Slow, quiet, unwelcome. No one announced it. No one wrote it in a headline. No one dared say it in public. But behind closed doors, in private notes, in unfinished sentences, the same thought kept appearing. What if this isn't geology? What if this isn't ice, or rock, or chance? What if this is process? That word changed everything. Because geology is passive. It erodes. It breaks. It reacts. Process implies steps, sequence, timing, control. And control implies something working, not just existing. The data didn't feel like nature anymore. It felt organized. The pulse, the thermal regulation, the mirror-like flashes, each one strange on its own. Together, unsettling. Like parts of a system revealing themselves one at a time. No one wanted to connect them. Because once you do, you can't pretend they're separate anymore. The object wasn't chaotic. It wasn't decaying. It wasn't slowly falling apart like most things in space. It was stable. Too stable. Stable across heat. Stable across radiation. Stable across time. That kind of stability isn't common. It's designed. That word, designed, never appeared in official documents, but it lived between the lines, in pauses, in the way people stopped mid-thought, in the way meetings ended earlier than planned. Because once the machine question enters the room, everything changes. A machine doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to move. It doesn't have to announce itself. A machine only has to function. And this object was functioning. The pulse wasn't random. The reflectivity wasn't scattered. The heat wasn't accidental. Each behavior had boundaries, limits. Like rules it followed. Machines follow rules. Someone finally said it softly. This looks less like an object. Falls. And more like a system. No one argued, because systems don't have to think. They just have to run. That idea felt safer and worse at the same time. Safer because it removed intent. Worse because it raised a new question. Who built the system? And why is it still running? The object didn't communicate. It didn't broadcast messages. It didn't change course to meet us. It just passed through, quietly, doing what it always does. Which suggested something chilling. We weren't the audience. We were incidental. Like ants noticing a train track, long after the trains stopped caring. That realization stripped away comfort. Because if it's a machine, it wasn't made for us. It was made for something else. Something older, something larger, something patient. The idea spread carefully. No emails titled artificial object. No bold claims. Just cautious language. Non-natural behavior. Structured response. Functional characteristics. Words designed to circle the truth without touching it. Because touching it means responsibility. Responsibility means consequences. And consequences mean history changes. Someone asked the obvious question. If it's artificial, why now? Why does it appear at this moment? Why does it pass through our system? Why do we see it at all? There were no good answers, only uncomfortable possibilities. Maybe it's old. So old that now doesn't matter. Maybe it's been drifting for millions of years, following a path set long before Earth had oceans. Maybe it's doing what it's always done, and we just happened to look up at the right time. That thought made everything feel smaller. Human history, human importance, all of it. Because if this machine predates us, then we're not observers. We're late arrivals. Another idea followed close behind. What if it's not alone? What if this is just one piece? One node? One fragment? A machine doesn't need to be big. It just needs to be part of something bigger. That idea never left the room. It just sat there, quietly, changing the air. Some argued it was still natural, a rare but extreme case. Nature can be strange. Nature can surprise. That's true. But nature doesn't repeat cleanly. It doesn't regulate without waste. It doesn't align systems without noise. This object did. It wasted nothing. No extra heat. No excess motion. No chaotic output. Efficiency like that has a signature, and that signature feels familiar, even across the vastness of space. Because we've built machines. We know how they behave. We recognize the calm confidence of of something that doesn't need to rush, that doesn't need to prove itself. That just works. And that recognition terrified people. Not because of fear of invasion, not because of danger, but because of implication. If something artificial exists out there, then intelligence has existed before. And if it existed before, then it may exist elsewhere, or still exist now. The object gave no answers, no escalation, no reaction to our growing awareness. It didn't change behavior when more eyes turned toward it. It didn't hide. It didn't respond. That indifference was the loudest signal of all, because indifference suggests certainty. Certainty that nothing here matters enough to adjust for. As the object moved onward, leaving perihelion behind, slipping back into darker space, the machine question followed it. Unanswered, unresolved. No official declaration was made, no consensus reached. But something fundamental had shifted. Science had crossed a quiet threshold from asking, "What is it?" to asking, "Who made it?" And that second question has no comfortable ending, because once you ask it, you can't stop thinking forward. Forward to origin, forward to intent, forward to possibility. And maybe that's why the idea stayed quiet, why it lived only in whispers, because saying it out loud would mean admitting something profound, that the universe might not just be full of matter and motion, but of artifacts left behind, still running, still silent, still watching nothing in particular because they don't need to. And if this really is a machine, then its presence isn't a warning. It's a reminder. That intelligence doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to conquer. Sometimes it just passes through, doing what it was built to do, long after its builders are gone. And if that's true, then the most unsettling question isn't who built it. It's this: what does a machine do when it has no one left to answer to? Outwardly, nothing changed. Press statements stayed calm, measured, carefully balanced. Words like interesting and unusual were chosen with precision. No urgency, no emotion. Just science doing what science always does. Observe, analyze, wait. To the public, it was just another object in space, another passing story that would fade from the news cycle. The sky still looked the same. The sun still rose. Life went on. But behind closed doors, everything was different. In conference rooms with no windows, in secure calls scheduled late at night, in messages that never made it into official records. Disbelief hardened into urgency. Not panic, urgency, because disbelief fades once evidence piles up. And the evidence was piling up fast. The anomaly wasn't weakening. It wasn't correcting itself. It wasn't vanishing under scrutiny. It was holding steady. That's what unnerved people the most. Usually, when humans focus on something long enough, it cracks. Mistakes appear. Errors surface. This didn't. The more it was observed, the clearer it became. And clarity can be dangerous. Scientists are trained to doubt, to question their instruments, their assumptions, their own perception. But now, perception itself was becoming the problem, because everyone was seeing the same thing, yet interpreting it differently. Some felt excitement. Others felt dread. A few felt something harder to describe. A subtle unease, like standing too close to something ancient and realizing it doesn't notice you at all. The object didn't react to attention. No spike when observations increased. No shift when headlines appeared. It didn't acknowledge us. And somehow, that felt worse than if it had. Because indifference removes control. You can prepare for threats. You can respond to signals. But how do you react to something that doesn't care whether you exist? That question haunted the rooms where decisions were being made. One scientist said it plainly. We're still assuming we're the observers. The room stayed quiet, because that assumption had guided science for centuries. We look, we measure, we understand. The universe doesn't look back. Except, what if that assumption is wrong? What if observation isn't one way? What if the act of watching changes what's being seen? The data hinted at it. The pulses appeared during observation windows. The reflectivity peaked at precise alignments. The thermal shifts anticipated exposure. It was subtle, enough to deny, enough to ignore, but enough to disturb. The object didn't respond to us. It responded around us, like it was tuned to its environment, and we were just another variable. That realization shifted perception from curiosity to caution. People stopped asking, what is it? They started asking, what does it do? And what role do we play in that? That's when urgency set in. Not fear of attack, fear of misinterpretation. Because history is shaped by moments where humans misunderstood what they were looking at. And those moments rarely end well. Some pushed for transparency. People deserve to know. Others pushed back. People don't need questions without answers. Both sides were right, and both sides were afraid. Because once the idea enters public consciousness that something artificial might exist beyond Earth, you can't control what comes next. Belief moves faster than data. Imagination fills gaps that science can't yet reach. And imagination can be powerful and destructive. So the language stayed careful. Every sentence filtered, every word weighed. Not to hide the truth, but to delay it, to buy time. Time to understand, time to prepare, time to make sure that when the truth arrived, it didn't arrive alone. But time has a way of slipping. The object kept moving, kept pulsing, kept regulating itself as if none of this mattered. And that contrast, the calm object and the restless observers, was impossible to ignore. One researcher described it quietly. It feels like we're studying footprints while something walks away. That image stuck because it captured the imbalance perfectly. We were reacting. It wasn't. We were interpreting. It was executing. And slowly, the deepest discomfort surfaced. What if this object isn't shaping our future, but shaping our thinking? What if the real impact isn't physical, but psychological? Because perception changes behavior. Behavior changes decisions, and decisions shape history. The object didn't need to speak. It didn't need to threaten. It only needed to exist in a way that broke expectation. And it did. People slept less, stared at the sky more, not out of fear, but out of quiet awareness. A sense that something fundamental had shifted. Even if no one could point to exactly where, the universe felt larger and less empty. And humans, for the first time in a long while, felt like participants instead of narrators. That shift was subtle but irreversible, because once perception changes, you can't return to innocence. The object would pass. The data would end. The reports would be archived. But the questions would remain. Questions about observation. about awareness, about whether the universe notices us or simply includes us. Without concern, publicly, the story stayed calm, quiet, controlled. But privately, something had already broken. The idea that humans are always at the center of the story. That idea didn't survive this encounter, and as the object drifted farther away, slipping back into the dark, a final, unsettling thought lingered in the minds of those who watched it closest. What if we weren't just observing the object? What if, in some small but meaningful way, it was teaching us how to observe? Not through words, not through commands, but through presence, through pattern, through the quiet pressure of something that doesn't explain itself and doesn't need to. And if that's true, then this moment wasn't just about discovery. It was about transformation, a shift in how we see the sky, and maybe a shift in how the sky sees us. Because once perception bends, reality is never far behind. And the next chapter would force humanity to confront a question even heavier than fear. Not what the object is, but what it means to know that it exists. There was a moment when the conversation split, not loudly, not all at once, but cleanly. On one side, those who said it meant nothing. On the other, those who couldn't stop seeing meaning everywhere. The pulses were back under scrutiny. Again, every rise, every fall, every pause between them. Some scientists leaned back and exhaled. This is what noise looks like when you stare too long. A fair argument. Space is vast. Distance distorts signals. Instruments have limits. When you look hard enough, patterns appear whether they're real or not. The human brain is built that way. We find faces in clouds, messages in randomness, intent where there may be none. So maybe this was just that. A trick of data stretched too far, a coincidence sharpened by attention. Maybe the pulses weren't pulses at all. Maybe they were shadows, misread as signals. That explanation felt comforting, because it put the mystery back inside us. Our fear, our bias, our imagination. But the other side couldn't let go, because the pulses didn't behave like mistakes. Mistakes drift, they smear, they change when you change how you look at them. These didn't. Different teams, different methods, different instruments, same timing, same rhythm, same silence between flashes. That silence mattered more than the light, because the flashes alone could still be dismissed. But the gaps were too clean, too consistent, too patient. If it were noise, it would rush. If it were error, it would stumble. This didn't. It waited, as if the absence of light was just as important as the light itself. That idea unsettled people, because silence isn't empty. Silence can carry structure. Anyone who has listened closely knows that. Music isn't just notes. It's the space between them, and this pattern felt composed. Not loud, not obvious, but intentional in its restraint. Some began searching for structure in the timing, not messages, not language, just order, ratios, intervals, repetition. Nothing obvious appeared. And that absence became part of the debate. If it were a signal, some argued, we'd recognize it, but that assumption carried weight. Because recognized by whose standards? Human standards. Signals don't have to be friendly. They don't have to be clear. They don't even have to be meant for us. What if this wasn't communication? What if it was function? A heartbeat doesn't speak. It sustains. A lighthouse doesn't talk. It exists. And those who believed something was there began to shift their thinking. Not signal as message, signal as byproduct, like radiation from a machine or heat from a process. Something happening, leaking just enough information to be noticed. That idea was harder to dismiss because it didn't assume intent toward us. It didn't place humanity at the center. It just acknowledged presence, something doing something, whether we were there or not. The pulses didn't speed up when watched. They didn't change frequency when debated. They didn't react to belief. They just continued, unmoved. That indifference cut both ways. To skeptics, it proved randomness. To others, it proved autonomy. Because a real signal doesn't need validation. It doesn't care if it's believed. It just is. Late-night discussions grew quieter, less argument, more staring. Because the longer people looked, the less sure they felt. Not about the data, but about themselves, about where interpretation ends and projection begins. Fear has a way of filling gaps. So does hope. And no one could say for certain which one was shaping this moment. Were we seeing intent because we wanted meaning, or were we resisting meaning because we feared its consequences? That tension hung in the air. Unresolved, someone raised a difficult point. What if both sides are wrong? What if the pulses aren't meaningless and aren't a message? What if they're just traces, like footprints in snow, evidence of passage, not communication? You don't ask footprints what they mean. You ask who made them and where they were going. That reframed everything, because suddenly the argument wasn't about belief. It was about humility, accepting that something can exist without explaining itself, that not every pattern is meant to be understood, that not every signal is meant to be received. The universe doesn't owe us clarity. That truth landed hard. Because humans are storytellers. We need beginnings, intentions, endings. And this had none, just a pattern, appearing, persisting, then slowly fading as distance grew. The pulses weakened, not abruptly, gradually, like a voice moving away down a long hallway. Still rhythmic, still present, just harder to hear. And that fading created its own discomfort. Because questions feel heavier when they're taken away unfinished. As the object slipped farther into darkness, the debate lost urgency, not because it was resolved, but because opportunity was passing. Whatever this was, signal or shadow, it wasn't waiting for consensus. It wasn't staying until we agreed. It was leaving, and that fact reframed the fear. Because maybe the real danger wasn't misinterpretation. Maybe it was missing the moment entirely. History is full of moments like that. Things noticed too late. Questions asked after the answer moved on. The pulses continued, then thinned, then became indistinguishable from background noise. At some point, you couldn't say where they ended, only where they had been. And suddenly, the debate felt smaller. Not unimportant, just overshadowed. Because the object had done something quietly profound. It had forced humanity to argue, not about what it was, but about how we decide what is real. About how easily fear can become meaning. About how easily meaning can become illusion. Or truth. No one left that debate unchanged. Skeptics became more cautious. Believers became more restrained. Everyone learns something uncomfortable. That certainty is fragile, and that the unknown doesn't need to announce itself to change us. As the pulses faded into silence, one final question lingered, not spoken aloud, but felt. If this really was just noise, then why did it feel so ordered? And if it really was a signal, then why did it say nothing at all? Maybe the truth sat somewhere in between. Not signal, not shadow, but something older. Something that exists before interpretation, before fear, before meaning. Something that doesn't care whether we understand it, only that we noticed. And maybe that's why this moment matters. Not because we proved anything, not because we decoded a message, but because, for a brief time, humanity stood at the edge of the unknown and had to confront a difficult possibility. That sometimes the universe doesn't speak, it simply reveals. And what we hear in that silence says more about us than it ever could about what's out there. As the object disappeared deeper into the dark, taking its pulses with it, the question remained. Hanging, unanswered. Was the signal real? Or was it the shadow of our own fear, cast against something we aren't ready to name? The sky didn't answer, it never does. But it remembered the moment we asked. At some point, the data stopped being the center of the conversation, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The charts were complete, the observations finished, the object was already drifting away, and yet nothing felt resolved, because the real disturbance wasn't in the numbers anymore. It was in the questions they left behind. Questions that didn't belong to astronomy. Questions that didn't fit inside equations or models. Questions that followed people home. Late at night, staring at ceilings or looking up at a sky that suddenly felt different. Because once you see a pattern like that, you can't unsee it. The pulse, the regulation, the restraint. Together, they did something quiet, but irreversible. They cracked the boundary between what happens and what it means. Astronomy usually stops at description. This object didn't let it. It forced a deeper pause. If the universe can produce behavior this precise, this efficient, this controlled, then where does nature end? And where does intention begin? That question unsettled people in ways fear never could. Because fear fades, but doubt reshapes. For centuries, humans have separated the universe into neat boxes. Natural and artificial. Random and designed. Alive and inert. Those divisions made the cosmos understandable, comfortable. But this object didn't fit cleanly into any of them. It wasn't alive, but it behaved. It wasn't communicating, but it responded. It wasn't violent, but it was deliberate. And deliberation is hard to ignore. Some philosophers were quietly consulted, not for answers, but for language, because science had reached the edge of what it could describe without stepping into meaning. And meaning is dangerous territory. Meaning forces reflection. Reflection forces humility. The question shifted again. Not, what is this object, but why does this bother us so much? The answer wasn't obvious until someone said it plainly. Because it blurs the line we rely on. That line between blind physics and purposeful action. Between chaos and control. If that line isn't fixed, then neither is our role. Humans have always assumed a kind of middle position. Not the creators of the universe, but not insignificant either. observers with growing understanding. But this moment challenged that balance, because if patterns like this can emerge without us, then observation isn't special, awareness isn't rare, and intelligence might not look like us at all. That realization hit quietly, like a slow breath leaving the room. We weren't alone in mystery. We were surrounded by it, and worse, we might not even be central to it. The universe didn't suddenly feel hostile. It felt indifferent, structured, but not for us, orderly, but not explainable on demand. And that indifference is harder to accept than threat, because threats give you purpose. Indifference just exists. The object didn't answer questions. It didn't leave a message. It didn't react to discovery. It simply passed through, executing whatever process it was built or shaped to execute. And that forced a shift in perception, from dominance to coexistence, from explanation to acceptance. People began to ask quieter questions. What if intention isn't rare, just unfamiliar? What if nature and design aren't opposites, but points on a spectrum we don't fully understand? What if the universe builds systems the way evolution builds life, slowly, silently, without asking permission? That idea didn't feel comforting, but it felt honest, because the universe has never promised simplicity, only consistency. And this object was consistent in ways that mattered. The awakening wasn't dramatic. No declarations, no philosophical revolutions overnight, just a subtle shift. A collective realization that certainty had limits, that knowledge has edges, and that beyond those edges is not chaos, but something structured we don't yet have words for. The dark felt deeper after that, not emptier. Deeper, filled with processes we don't see, systems we don't recognize, patterns we may never fully decode. And, for the first time in a long while, humanity wasn't asking how to conquer the unknown. It was asking how to sit with it, how to exist without needing to be the answer. That shift mattered, because humility changes how questions are asked, and questions shape futures. As the object faded beyond reach, leaving behind only memory and debate, it became clear that its greatest impact was never physical. It didn't alter orbits. It didn't threaten worlds. It altered perspective. It forced an awakening, not to danger, but to scale, to possibility, to the unsettling idea that the universe may be far more organized than we imagined, and far less concerned with us than we hoped. And in that realization, something ancient stirred. Not fear, not awe, but a quiet understanding that our place in the dark is not to dominate, but to observe carefully, question honestly, and accept that some truths arrive, not as answers, but as shifts. Shifts in how we see, shifts in how we think, shifts in how we understand ourselves against the vast, silent architecture of the cosmos. And once that awakening begins, there is no returning to the sky we once thought we knew, only forward, into questions that no longer belong to science alone, but to existence itself. And the next chapter would leave us with something even heavier than uncertainty. Not a question about the universe, but about what happens after the universe lets you see a little more than you're ready for, and then goes silent again. And then it was over. Not with a sound, not with a flash, not with an ending that felt complete, just quiet. As the object passed perihelion and began its slow retreat from the sun, something subtle happened. The pulse weakened. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It thinned, like a heartbeat fading into distance. Tap, pause, tap. Then, longer pauses. Then, none at all. The light curve flattened. The rhythm that had held steady for so long lost its edge, lost its urgency, and dissolved into the background glow of space. At the same time, the thermal pattern collapsed. The careful balance, cooling under exposure, warming in shadow, smoothed out. No resistance, no regulation, just passive behavior. Like any other silent traveler, the object was still there, still moving, still real. But whatever had made it different was gone. Data streams continued, but they felt empty now. Numbers without tension, graphs without meaning. The anomaly had ended, and that unsettled people more than if it had exploded. Because explosions give closure. Silence does not. Scientists waited for a final spike. A last pulse. A farewell. Nothing came. The object drifted farther away, slipping back into the dark between stars, becoming smaller, colder, quieter, until it was just another point of light, indistinguishable, forgettable. Except it wasn't, because the questions stayed. They stayed in labs long after monitors went dark. They stayed in notes that never became papers. They stayed in minds that couldn't unsee what they had seen. Because data can end, but implication doesn't. The sky returned to normal. Orbits behaved. Models held. The universe resumed its familiar rhythm. And yet, something felt missing, like a sound that stops suddenly, leaving your ears ringing in the quiet. Some tried to wrap it up cleanly, a rare natural event, an extreme case, an illusion sharpened by attention. Those explanations were filed, archived, accepted, publicly. But privately, they felt thin, because nature doesn't usually stop mid-behavior. It doesn't perform, then withdraw. It doesn't reveal structure, then erase it cleanly, unless the structure was never meant to persist, unless it was temporary, purposeful, a phase, not a state. That idea lingered, uncomfortable, unprovable. What if the object wasn't meant to be studied indefinitely? What if the anomaly wasn't a feature, but a moment? Triggered by proximity to the sun. Activated by geometry. Revealed only under specific conditions. Then shut down. Like a process completing its cycle. That thought reframed everything. Because processes end. Messages end. Tests end. And endings imply intent. But intent toward what? Toward us? Or towards something else entirely? Some asked if this was a message, a signal meant to be noticed, briefly. Then withdrawn. But messages usually repeat. They insist. This did not. Others suggested it was a test, not of intelligence, but of perception, a way to see who notices, who questions, who resists easy answers. That idea felt unsettling, because tests imply evaluation, and evaluation implies awareness. Then there was the darkest possibility, that it wasn't meant for us at all, that it was a warning, not to humanity, but to something else. A marker, a signal flare, a system checking in, then moving on. And we just happened to be nearby, accidental witnesses to a conversation not meant for us. That possibility carried a strange kind of humility, because it removed us from the center. We weren't chosen, we weren't targeted, we were present. And presence alone doesn't guarantee understanding. As weeks passed, attention shifted. New discoveries arrived. New anomalies demanded focus. The universe kept moving. It always does. But this moment left a quiet scar. Not on the sky, but on expectation. Because something had passed through our system. Done something undeniably structured. And then left without explanation, without consequence, without acknowledgement. That combination is rare and unsettling, because humans are used to cause and effect, action and reaction. But this had action without response, like a knock on a door that stops before you can answer, leaving you standing there, wondering who it was and why they knocked at all. The data will be studied for years, reanalyzed, reinterpreted, but the moment itself can't be repeated. Perihelion has passed. The geometry is gone. The conditions won't align again. Whatever happened, happened once. And that finality carries weight, because it means there may never be confirmation. No follow-up. No second chance. Just memory and doubt and wonder. The sky looks the same now. Stars burn, planets turn. Nothing points to what occurred. And yet, anyone who watched closely knows the truth. Something was there. Something behaved in a way that doesn't fit cleanly into the old boxes. And then it stopped. Not with violence, not with drama, but with restraint, which may be the most unsettling ending of all. Because restraint suggests confidence. Confidence suggests purpose. And purpose doesn't require applause. The object didn't leave us answers. It left us altered, more cautious, more aware, less certain that silence means emptiness. And maybe that was the point. Not to inform, not to warn, but to remind that the universe doesn't owe us clarity, that not everything announces itself, that some things pass through quietly, do what they were meant to do, and leave us changed, without ever explaining why. As the sky returns to silence, one final question remains. Not in data, not in charts, but in the space between certainty and doubt. Was this a message, spoken once and never repeated? Was it a test of perception, of humility, of readiness? Or was it a warning, not about danger, but about scale, about how much exists beyond us, that doesn't need our attention and doesn't seek our understanding? The universe doesn't answer. It never has. It simply continues. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the most important encounters don't arrive with meaning attached. They arrive, they unfold, they end, and leave us alone with the responsibility to decide what they meant. The object is gone now. The pulses have faded. The heat has settled. The sky is quiet again. But the silence feels different, heavier, like something has passed and the universe is waiting to see what we do with the memory of it.